Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to a wrap-up of most of the stuff I read in March, I think. I mean, the month isn't over yet, but it's been a while since I sat down to do a wrap-up. It stresses me out to feel like I'm really far behind on talking about some things. And like looking over this list too, I read some stuff that I don't have like really deep opinions on. On the other hand, sometimes I start talking and then something just spews out and it's like, wow, apparently I had way more thoughts on this than I thought I did. First up is Always Coming Home by Ursula K. Guin. I buddy read this with Joe and it's a good thing I did because I needed somebody to talk to about it. This was published in 1985 and it's like an experimental non-novel. It's not a novel. It's more like a collection, very anthropological, of stories, plays, poems, songs, recipes, how this one culture called the Kesh live in a very, very far future, kind of a post-apocalyptic world that's recovering. I did not love this book. I thought it was a curiosity to read and experience, and I decided to film a separate review video on it to go more in depth about what I reacted to well and poorly in it, so that is forthcoming. Next is The Dark Forest by Cixin, translated from Chinese by Joel Martinsen. This is the second book in the Three Body Problem series. That's not actually the name of the series, but it's the sequel to the Three Body Problem. I find myself a couple of weeks later more disappointed in the book than when I first finished it, because Cixin promises and delivers on really awesome, grand scale ideas. But it is so let down. The book as a whole is let down by awful characters in two senses. One is that none of them are likable. I can't empathize or sympathize with any of them. And the other is they are flat. They are cardboard cutouts. The characters only act in service to the plot. They're just supports. They're not people. The dialogue is terrible. I'm working myself up to a rant, but that's just bad. And then add on top of it that I don't think that Cixin can write women well at all. I also don't think he's really interested in writing any character well, much less women, but it was really getting to me by the end of the book that all the women were unnamed sexual objects, wives, mothers, and all of our major characters who do the thinking and the big actions are men. Anyway, I read it. I'm glad I read it. I want to finish the series. As you can see, I have Death's End there, and I will be reading that in April most likely. So I'm charging on ahead. I cannot talk this morning. This is just awful. Oh my god, I forgot my tea. Oh my god. More paint stripper than tea, but I'm gonna drink it anyway. Where was I? Catalyst by Kiriki Hoffman. I picked this up on a whim from the library because I knew Hoffman's name. I don't think I'd read any of her fiction prior to this, but she's won some major awards for her fantasy, and I think that Catalyst is her only or perhaps her first science fiction story. I didn't like it. It is about a teenage boy who lives on another planet, and while running away from the girl who bullies him at school, he makes first contact with an alien species that has lain dormant on the planet for millennia. I will be succinct. The sexual content in this turned me off. I believe it's supposed to be a story about coming into sexual maturity, perhaps. It just made my skin crawl. The interactions between this boy and this, I think, slightly older girl, he has an immediate interest in her because she's his type. She is like tall and big and muscly. She's just exactly what he, what turns him on. And when he expresses an interest in her, she just flips on him, she attacks him, beats him up, poisons him with her augmented body and stuff. And she also has a sexual interest in him, and then combine this terrible dynamic of abuse and bullying and fetish with the alien aspect. Ew. I would also, however, criticize this story for being very ill told. A whole string of things happen within a couple of days, major things, and characters never like pause and reflect or I think even interact believably about it. And that is possibly because the wider culture, the society that they're working within, that would inform their behavior, especially how they treat aliens, how they react to sudden alien influence, isn't explained. There are hints of it, but not enough to make believable what the characters are doing, if that makes any sense. It was too much information, too quickly, very rushed, and then it ends awfully. Do not recommend. Next up is a book that I very much enjoyed, but it did take me 2 or 3 years to finally pick it up, and that is The Hallowed Hunt by Lois McMaster Bujold. It is the 3rd book published in the World of the Five Gods, and you know, I should have read it earlier because The Hallowed Hunt isn't as good as The Curse of Chalion or Paladin of Souls, but it is still an excellent fantasy novel. I have just in this moment decided that I want to do a separate video about this book because I have notes on it, so I'm gonna do that. But suffice to say, it's a great fantasy novel about gods who want to effect change and right a wrong in the world, and they can only do that by working through human conduits. Brothers Ruin by Emma Newman. This is her new novella out from Tor.com this month in March, I think. It's the first in a series that's called Industrial Magic. I thought this was okay. I thought it was a pretty decent start to a series, but really had that setup feel. This is the slightly boring story that must be told before the interesting things can happen. I did really enjoy reading it. I thought it was very solidly written, and I think I'm going to be very invested in some of these characters in future installments. It's about a young woman named Charlotte who has magical abilities, and because she is a latent, she can basically be like confiscated by the government. People with magic must serve the country and the government. They're not allowed to have any life outside of that. She wants to have her own life. She has dreams of being married, having a husband and a family, and having her kind of secret career as an illustrator. This is set in an alt history fantasy steampunky 1850s London, so there are some women's issues, feminist themes in this as well. Fortunately, while Charlotte is very good at keeping her magic under wraps, she does something completely non-magical, by the way, which makes her father believe that her brother, whom she is very close to, is a latent, and her family tells the government they come in to test him, and Charlotte basically helps him fake his tests so that he will get a nice offer, that his family will be paid, and it will help them in their stressed financial situation. It's a difficult no-win situation where I can't really agree with anything that she does because many of them are dishonest, but I understood her desire to live a normal life. There's nothing wrong with wanting a normal life. Unpopular opinion time. I'm gonna try to push my inhibitions to the side and just be very honest about this next book. Gemina by Amie Kaufman and J. Kristoff. It's the sequel to the insanely popular Illuminae, which I read last year and I thought was pretty decent science fiction, you know, for YA science fiction. I think I called it baby BSG, and I still stand by that. Gemina, however, commits more sins than Illuminae did, which means there's nothing in it to distract from the fundamental problem of both books, which is that they're really horribly written. They're just not written very well. Gemina is atrociously written. The dialogue is cliché written and trying so hard to be funny that it's embarrassing. The characters are shambling piles of stereotypes. The villains are so villainous it is hilarious, and the plot is painfully predictable. I could maybe go on a larger rant about this, but that's it in a nutshell. It all comes down to the writing is bad, and the whole thing is trying way too hard to be funny all the time. And most of the time, cracking jokes is so inappropriate. I was going to theorize about why people love this so much, but I don't think that's my place. Clearly I didn't like it. I have a massive bias against most parts of Gemina, so I will just leave it there. I didn't like it. Will I read the third book? You betcha. Will I enjoy it more? That depends on the authors. Next, I read Light by M. John Harrison. This is the first book in the Empty Space trilogy, and I read it because I need to read the second book, Nova Swing, for my Arthur C. Clarke Award Winners project. I don't really know what to think of Light. The first half, I was bored and confused. The second half, I really got into it, but I think I was held back so much by how much I disliked the characters, and I didn't like the sex. There are so many sexual hang-ups in the story and like weird masturbation moments and stuff. Not my thing. The story is that these three people from different times and places are being pursued by a like quantum entity called the Shrander, though they know it under different names. One of these is a serial killer physicist living in our time. He's working with a colleague on quantum physics. A woman in the future who has fused herself with a K ship, a spaceship, and her brother who is like addicted to virtual reality. I don't understand the ending at all, but at least in the last like 50 pages, it piqued my interest so much that I am genuinely excited to go on to the next book and see what could possibly happen next. Down to the last two. The next one is a historical fantasy called The Dark Days Club by Alison Goodman, and this was a Regency era romp. I loved reading this so much. It was just a lot of fun. I've been having trouble like reading a book quickly recently, but I read this in 2 days and it's like 500 pages long. This is about a young woman named Lady Helen who debuts into society. She's basically on the marriage market looking for a husband and discovers she has like supernatural powers, and she is one of the people who is supposed to protect the country and the world from demons. I expected that this was going to have kind of a Pride and Prejudice romance in it based on the time period and just the way the story was going. She meets the slightly disagreeable man who's kind of dark and mysterious, and they don't hit it off very well, but I was like, by the end of this book, she's totally gonna fall for him, right? I was just pleasantly surprised that there is a sizable lack of romance in the book. Still promises that it might come in the next book, and I wouldn't be unhappy about it at all. I just thought the entire thing was really enjoyable. And I'm unhappy because my library doesn't have book 2. I think book 2 came out a couple of months ago, and I really want to read it, and I can't interlibrary loan it, and I don't want to buy it because I'm kind of on a book buying ban. This is a terrible position to be in. Gaudy Night by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is one of the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries that is narrated from Harriet Vane's point of view. She is a mystery writer, a detective, and she is the woman that Lord Peter really wants to marry, but she's been saying no to him for 5 years. Harriet goes back to Oxford University where she was educated. She goes back for an event, which is basically a reunion with colleagues and professors and such, and they ask her to investigate a poison pen, probably a woman who lives there who is sending them nasty grams, playing pranks on them, destroying property and such. They don't know who this is and they don't know what the motive is, so Harriet is trying to gather evidence and such. A lot of this book, like 500 pages of it, are well-educated women, most of whom who have chosen a career or an academic life over a domestic one, talking about this, about choosing one over the other. You know, what can women do this? Can you have it all? Can you only have a part of it? It's got some very like feminist themes because of that. I don't think I agree with all of it, but for a book that I think is from 1935 or whatever, this was interesting. My favorite parts of this were all those scenes when you have all these women gathered in the evenings drinking their cocoa and their coffee and just talking about this. I struggled with the first half of this book because it just seemed so slow, rather dull. It wasn't going anywhere. And then like the last 100 pages kicked it into high gear and hit all those notes I wanted with Harriet working with Lord Peter. I feel like there was like this huge payoff of them never being in scenes together when you really want them to, because they've reached this point in their relationship where it's literally she can't string him along anymore. She either has to give in to his marriage proposals or cut him off finally. And you're like, has she been fair to him? Does she really understand why he loves her? Does he need to drop the subject? Also, what's going on with him? Because he has a more complex psychology than I think Harriet wanted to admit throughout most of the book. So you finally get scenes of them together talking about the case, but also kind of their relationship and each other. And it's a real learning experience for Harriet. That just made the end of the book for me. I have one more book and I think a collection of short stories, and then I should be done with all of the Lord Peter stuff that Dorothy Sayers wrote, which then I'll have to find another mystery series to really tackle. This video has become a complete mess, and I commend you if you've made it this far. You probably get a gold star and lots of like Easter chocolate and stuff. Go to town. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again to talk to you soon, and until then, bye.